Good morning. We are trying to go live in all the places. Okay, this morning we're going to talk about gut health and hormones because part of what I do is help my patients with hormones, often in perimenopause and menopause. And when we're looking at hormones, we can't ignore the gut and the microbiome. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to talk about that today and answer any questions you have about gut health and the microbiome. But I'm really going to talk about some specific things as far as gut health is concerned. So, when we look at the microbiome, we know that the microbiome is basically your bugs. So I, jokingly tell patients we are like 90% bugs. And not many people realize that your hormones have this like bidirectional relationship with your microbiome. And so let's talk about kind of all of the things that it impacts. So, first of all, when we talk about specifically hormone changes and the change from perimenopause to menopause, we know that your change in estrogen specifically influences the microbiome. So, kind of to back up, we know the microbiome is the bug balance in your body, in your gut. And that bug balance is determined by so many factors, including, hormone changes, aging, stress, obviously diet, and so many things impact that microbiome. But the fact of estrogen changing in a perimenopausal state, a postpartum state, can actually influence your microbiome and impact the regulation of your good and bad bugs in the gut. And so we see during menopause and perimenopause, estrogen levels are doing this. And so that actually leads to what's referred to as a reduced microbial diversity. So this means that there's less diversity in your gut bugs. Now, when we look at bugs in certain areas of the gut, there are certain areas where we want diversity and certain areas where we don't. So when we look at, reproductive health, when we look at vaginal health and uterine health, we're looking at lack of diversity. We want certain bugs to kind of dominate that space. But when we look at the gut, we actually want there to be a lot of diversity in there with your microbiome. And so when I'm talking to patients about this, I say, like, think about your gut as a community, right? Everyone's kind of like living in this ecosystem together and they're regulating a lot of the different processes that happen in your body as a result. And so if that ecosystem is disrupted, a lot of things are going to change. So what we see in perimenopause, as estrogen's doing this, we see changes in the microbiome. And in menopause, we actually see as estrogen levels have kind of bottomed out, we see this extremely low level of diversity, which influences, a lot of patients come to see me and they'll be in perimenopause and they'll say, all of a sudden, when I hit perimenopause, my digestion got awful, or now I'm bloated, or now I'm, have IBS all of a sudden when my digestion was fine and I can't figure out why and I can't pinpoint, the dietary source. And one of those reasons is because the hormonal shifts that you experience in perimenopause can really throw your gut through a loop, objectively. Okay. So the consequences of this can be that you have more inflammatory bacterial activity. So a lot of inflammation comes from the gut. Not many people know this. Is that when you are inflamed, it's not necessarily like an injury, your shoulder pain or whatever. It can actually be from digestive health. And we have a reduced beneficial metabolite production in the gut. And so I'm going to talk about the specific metabolites that are made in the gut that are really important to human health. But when we have a lack of diversity, we have less of those. And so we know that the microbiome, like I said, the estrogen and the microbiome work together. So the microbiome regulates estrogen and estrogen regulates the microbiome. And so we know that there are actual microbial enzymes that help metabolize estrogen. Okay. So this actually can regulate whether estrogen is reactivated or excreted. So are we actually going to get rid of our estrogen, or are we going to, recycle it and use it again? That has to do with our gut bugs. So, when we try to do these hormonal treatments, whether it's hormone replacement therapy, whether it's, anything else that we're doing to regulate hormones, you're like, I'm eating, soy and flax seeds and I'm doing all the things. But if your gut is a mess, we're not going to be able to regulate those hormones because ultimately we're not influencing the excretion and metabolism of your hormones in a positive way in that case, right? Because at the end of the day, we can have enzymes, specifically like beta-glucuronidase, which is going to decide whether or not your hormones are going to be recycled or they're going to be excreted. Again, we go through the liver, through the bowels. We have to process the hormones and then we get rid of them. And so when we are looking at this from a hormone perspective, we need to make sure that we're actually, recycling and excreting and keeping, right? Again, it's not that we want to get rid of all our estrogen, because this is where the balance comes in. I talk about this a lot with the thyroid. Like, if you were to, every time you need thyroid hormones, dump everything out that you have, that's not going to be helpful, right? Because then you're going to have way too much hormones and then, none, and then way too much and then none, right? So we have these regulatory mechanisms. And when it comes to estrogen, one of the regulatory mechanisms is that our gut and our liver help us gatekeep, like, how much do we recycle and how much do we get rid of? So we end up in that balance, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at when it comes to changes in estrogen. So we know that the microbiome can actually directly affect your circulating estrogen levels as a result. And we know that when the microbiome is disrupted, estrogen metabolism becomes altered. There is the balance between active and inactive estrogen that starts to shift. We know that this can contribute to lower estrogen availability or altered signaling in tissue. So we're just not responding appropriately to hormones when our gut is off. We also know that inflammation is a central downstream effect. The microbiome, like I said, most inflammation comes from the gut and comes from the microbiome. And microbiome changes can lead to increased intestinal permeability, which is also known as leaky gut, right? Like, when we hear people talk about leaky gut, we know that a lot of times this can be due to the microbial composition, right? And this is because when we look at the gut is going to be the system that should be separating your body, the inside of your body, from the external world, right? We consume food, it comes in through the digestive tract, and it should be really secure and intact so we can process that food and we can absorb what we need to absorb and we can excrete what we need to excrete and not have any sort of immune interactions, right? As soon as there is this intestinal permeability, right, we have components of the food that's able to go through proteins that are interacting with our immune system that's not supposed to happen, right? And so when we have that happen, we have more inflammatory reactions, we have more immune activation. And so keeping the gut intact and healthy is a really big deal when we're looking at treating overall inflammation. So when we have this increased intestinal permeability, we have increased inflammation. And also, we know that the microbiome estrogen interactions are also associated with things like insulin resistance, fat distribution changes, metabolic syndrome, because we know that inflammatory signaling disrupts your insulin pathways. And we know that altered estrogen signaling affects your fat storage patterns. And so a lot of people have a lot of these things happening at once, right? They have hormonal changes leading up to perimenopause, and then they start having digestive issues, and then they start gaining weight, and they're like, oh my God, everything's happening. Everything's happening to me. But really, it's a lot of these processes happening together. That's why weight is complex, specifically because that's why insulin is complex as well. Because really, it's not like take away hormones, gain weight, put hormones in, lose weight. It just doesn't work like that, right? But we have all of these things. It's like the dominoes keep falling in different areas when we have a change in another area. So specifically, hormones change, microbiome changes, it leads to being more inflammatory. More inflammation leads to altered insulin signaling, and you see how the dominoes just keep shifting, right? We also see there's association with bone health and bone health regulation. We know that the estrogen decline and microbiome changes can lead to increased bone resorption and decreased bone formation. So we know that inflammation activates osteoclasts, which is part of that bone turnover conversation. And we know that reduced estrogen signaling affects bone turnover. We know estrogen is really important for bones. There's also a link between the microbiome and estrogen to mood. And oftentimes I'm talking to patients about inflammation equals neuroinflammation. And so if in the gut you are inflamed, you are more than likely going to have more inflammation that goes across that blood-brain barrier. And we see these connections with things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, right? So inflammation equals neuroinflammation. And again, coming back to the gut is really important there. Again, I talked about the gut kind of barrier integrity. We know that there is an influence on the gut barrier. We know this increases permeability. This allows endotoxins to circulate. Again, we're supposed to have this like closed system that doesn't allow anything from the outside world to come in. And when it does, that is a problem, right? So let's talk about kind of the role of diet and the role of lifestyle and what we can actually do about these pieces. So we know that diet helps shape our microbial diversity, our microbial composition, and the microbial metabolic activity. The biggest thing you can do for your microbiome is fiber. We know that fiber intake supports that beneficial bacteria, increases the production of short chain fatty acids, and short chain fatty acids are super anti inflammatory. Short chain fatty acids support the gut barrier, and short chain fatty acids can help influence estrogen metabolism. So I'm often talking to my patients about fiber because we live in a world or in like a culture where we are obsessed with protein and we don't talk enough about fiber. We talk about protein. We have people on these carnivore diets, which in my opinion is the most damaging diet we can do from a women's health and hormone perspective because they lack fiber. There is no fiber. And when we don't have fiber, we can't feed gut bugs. And I know a lot of people anecdotally will fight with me about the carnivore diet and say, but I feel amazing. And that's great. But I want to see the long-term data that tells me that that amazing translates to better cardiovascular outcomes, reduced inflammation, because the patients that I've spoken to that are doing the carnivore diet are pooping like once a week. And they're like, that's normal. That's what we do on this diet. I'm like, that is not normal. It's not normal. We have to poop every day. We have to focus on our fiber. It's really easy. Like one of the things that we can pretty much guarantee is that when you are trying to hit a protein goal, you can literally do that eating fast food all day. You can hit a protein goal, getting fast food all day. You will not hit your fiber goal. And if you do, you'll go over your caloric goal, right? In order to hit your fiber goal and your protein goal, eating a crappy diet, it's not going to happen. So I think the thing is with fiber, it's not about adding a fiber supplement. Like everyone wants to run to like, okay, great. I love this information. What fiber supplement should I add? I come back to you and say, the fiber variety also matters. It matters not that you're just having, Metamucil every single day, which by the way, I love Metamucil. It matters that you're having different sources of fiber all the time. Variety, right? When we think about some of the core things for gut health, it really comes down to variety. How much variety are you getting in this diet? So fiber is huge. The recommendation is 25 to 35 grams a day for women. So I would say, meet that and try to exceed it. When you go and you increase fiber for the first time ever, if you've never done it before, you eat like 8 grams of fiber, it's going to cause you to be bloated. It potentially is going to cause you to be constipated if you don't have enough water intake. Like those are important things to consider. We don't need to go full in, right? Balls to the wall, but looking at it from a perspective of how can I just slowly increase my fiber? How can I be mindful of adding in one more meal that has fiber this week, right? Start slow. Figure out what types of things have fiber. How can I make a meal that I love high fiber? I'll give you an example. I really love the high fiber wraps. I personally get them from Costco, and they are unreal. They have 17 grams of fiber. They're a big wrap. They're 90 calories a wrap. I believe the brand is Mexicana, but they're a large wrap. They're 90 calories. They're 17 grams of fiber, and they are fantastic. And so we will do a taco night instead of doing a low fiber taco. I'll give regular tacos to my kids if they want them. If I'm, trying to hit a goal for myself, I'm using one of those wraps. I'm putting like refried beans or whatever beans, a little bit of rice, a little bit of the taco meat, and then whatever else you want. Now you have more of a burrito situation. Now you've upped your fiber and you're going to be more full. Your blood sugar is going to be more balanced. Everything's going to feel better overall. So that's a really good way to start to add fiber. Think about how you can incorporate beans. Anytime you do a ground meat situation, you can add beans to that. You can easily add lentils. Lentils are small and easy to kind of incorporate in that sense. Black beans go really well with a ground meat. So it's not just about having a salad with cucumber and tomato. And I often am telling my patients, take inventory on your fiber. Actually go through your diet, use a tracking app or whatever for a day. There's lots of AI apps and it makes it very easy to track your fiber. But look at it and see how you can incorporate fiber. Like, what are you hitting in terms of a goal? Are you at 10 grams? Then you have a long way to go. Are you already close to 20? Great. You're doing amazing, right? Things like avocado have fiber, things like berries, right? How can we incorporate that? And that leads me to my next point about the microbiome, polyphenols. Polyphenols are also massive to helping with gut health and a happy microbiome. And the reason for that is polyphenols modulate that microbial composition, right? They help feed gut bugs. They support beneficial bacterial growth. They influence estrogen metabolism. They reduce oxidative stress because polyphenols are antioxidants. And so polyphenols are found in, think about things that are colorful, berries, peppers. And by the way, coffee is full of polyphenols. So that's my excuse that I drink lots of coffee. And also a side note, a lot of things that people don't realize is coffee is not actually dehydrating. That's a myth that's been busted. And I love that for me because I love coffee. So there's that fun fact for the day. Coffee doesn't dehydrate you. Coffee is brown water. Okay. So when we look at polyphenols, polyphenols are massive. Sometimes I will add this in if I'm doing a gut protocol with a patient. Sometimes I will add this in, like polyphenols in a therapeutic dose, in a supplement or something else, because I feel like it's necessary and advantageous for that patient. But a lot of time I'm just saying variety, color, coffee, berries, that sort of thing, right? When we look at Western dietary patterns, what we're used to eating, what we see in our typical, what's called the standard American diet, which is the SAD diet, literally, and it is kind of sad. It's low fiber. It's a lot of processed food, really not a lot of anything, high refined carbs. And this is where people think that carbs are bad. This is where people learn that carbs are really bad for you and carbs make you gain weight. It's really because our diet is filled with refined carbohydrates, not because carbohydrates inherently are bad, right? So we know that that causes inflammation, that impairs estrogen regulation and metabolism. And so, in my opinion, diet should be a primary intervention. Diet can modify the microbiome despite those hormonal changes. So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It might be that you have a hormone change because you're in perimenopause, or because you have PCOS, or because you're postpartum. But ultimately, we can use diet as a leverage tool to change that microbiome. We can add in fiber. We can look at variety, right? Like the easiest and best thing is to say, go to the grocery store and choose one produce item that you haven't eaten in a while or haven't had before. You know, my best example is like, grab a turnip and like put it on your sheet pan meal, right? Because doing something like that is going to give your bugs different food sources. If we're always using the same food sources, cucumber, tomato, pepper, lettuce, we're never going to get that microbiome variety, right? Different types of fiber. Psyllium fiber is a wonderful fiber. Fiber from chia seeds is wonderful. Fiber from flax seeds, right? We don't want to always do the same type of fiber. We want to make sure that we're looking at variety. Now, you're like, I love that, but every time I add variety, my gut's a mess, my bloating's worse. You know, this is where we talk about the microbiome as something that we need to fix, something that we need to assess in kind of a different capacity. Because when we look at the gut, I always look at the gut like a garden. Most gardens have weeds. And essentially our first goal is to understand, you know, what is there so we can de-weed to change the microbiome. And so I'll give you an example. Basically, when we look at the microbiome, we see this balance of good and bad bugs and those hormone changes, a viral illness, high stress, aging, antibiotics, etc., can change the way your microbiome is functioning, can give the opportunity for things that we don't want to overgrow to kind of overgrow and end up there. And so when we're looking at how we get started, if somebody introduces fiber, when we look at conditions like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we often see when somebody introduces fiber, they get worse. They're like, I cannot tolerate fiber. I'm so bloated. I feel so gassy. Like it doesn't feel good at all. That's where we might go in and do a little bit of that microbiome work before we lead up to that fiber intake. So yes, the goal is fiber. We need fiber, fiber, fiber. But if somebody can't tolerate fiber, we need to work them up to that. So Some examples are antimicrobials. So think about nature's antibiotics, think about garlic, oregano, rosemary, thyme, think about those types of things. Those are the types of strategies we would use in an antimicrobial protocol. Now, sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced than that, right? Sometimes we're doing a GI map or a stool test to understand, okay, what is actually here? Because some people have parasites or yeast or other any type of overgrowth where we need a little bit more of a targeted approach. But really, we have the gut like a garden, we have the garden itself, and then we have essentially the security system around the garden. And that security system is like a fence, right? Think about the immune system being part of that security or that surveillance system. We have the immune system and we have the stomach acid. The role of the stomach acid is to help deactivate anything that comes in. So we have a bug that comes in that isn't supposed to live there. And the role is that we have the stomach acid that's going to stop that from being able to stay and like plant roots and grow, right? So essentially, when we're looking at the gut, it's like we have to remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and rebalance. So that removal might be using some of those antimicrobial strategies to get rid of some of that overgrowth. And then after that, we build up. So, like I said, sometimes fiber is the last stop because we have to do a little bit of that work to kill off a parasite, yeast, whatever bacteria is there or whatever kind of overgrowth someone has. But ultimately, the long term goal is like, how can we get that fiber in there at least 25 grams and get it consistently in there? Again, we know other things that impact the microbiome is lifestyle, exercise influences the microbiome, stress, hormones, all the things. But diet is really foundational. And so being able to kind of work to that is the main goal. And knowing that there's a relationship between your hormones and your gut, some of my patients can literally just fix their gut and their hormone symptoms go away. They have, heavy periods, painful periods, spotting, and we just focus our work on the gut and things really turn around for them. So, anyways, I just wanted to share that information for you guys. This will be on my Facebook, my YouTube, my Instagram. So feel free to circle back if you just popped in here and take a look. And if you're not subscribed to wherever you're watching this, make sure you're subscribed and have a good rest of your day, guys.